Hello there everyone, today's video is all about the differences between SIPPs and SSASs. Now what is a SIPP? What is a SSAS? Well, basically they are a form of pension, and I'm going to talk about various tax breaks that are afforded to both of them and various options that are available. Why would you choose one over the other? So first of all, let's start with an example of a trading company. So we've got a trading company, husband and wife are the director shareholders, and they've done very well. They've had a great year. And I've done separate videos on this about putting pension contributions from the limited company into a pension to save corporation tax. Now, the annual amount that you can do is £40,000 a year. But if you haven't done the previous 3 years worth of 40,000, so long as at some point in the past you have an active pension scheme that's still open, you can quadruple up in the current year. You could do the previous 3 lots of 40 grand plus this year. So just assume in this example that husband and wife have had a really good year, and they've made, let's say they've made £500,000 of profit in their limited company, and they're a bit flush with cash, but they haven't done pensions for a while. In theory, they could put in 160 grand each. So that's 320 grand from the company into a pension. So putting in 320 grand is going to save over £60,000 worth of corporation tax on £500,000 profits. Best part of a 100 grand tax bill. But you put in 320 grand, you're going to knock 60 grand plus off that 100 grand bill. It's not a bad way to get your corporation tax bill down. But anyway, now assume that they do all that in one go. Now, if they hadn't had previous year's capacity, then they can still do the 40 grand each. But let's say that the type of pension that they put it into is a SIPP. So I would always say, and now listen, I'm not giving investment advice here, this is just what I would do. I would say a SIPP, easiest option. It's cheaper, it's not a lot of fees to set up a SIPP. Money goes in. So in this case, 320 grand, which has saved 60 grand of tax. Now, it's in this SIPP. So the SIPP, whatever it's invested in, stock market, commercial property, whatever it's invested in, the yields thereon, so the rental income, the dividend income, that's all tax-free in the SIPP wrapper. Capital appreciation, that is tax-free. Let's say they put the whole thing in a commercial property and it grew in value, and then they cash that in and put it in something else, no capital gains tax, as long as it's in the pension wrapper. So tax-free yield, tax-free capital appreciation. Now, let's just say in this scenario that they've got this 320 grand of cash. This is a new SIPP that they've set up, and they've said, you know what? We've seen a commercial building that we'd like to buy to trade out of. So the SIPP can borrow up to 50% of its value on a commercial mortgage. You go to a mortgage broker, go to a bank, and a SIPP can borrow just like individuals or companies can borrow. And the rules say that the SIPP can borrow 50% of its value. So in this case, let's say we've got 320 grand in there. Now, 50% of that is 160. So this pension pot, this SIPP, could acquire a commercial building for just shy of £500,000. So 320 plus it goes out and gets a commercial loan, mortgage on 160, and it can afford to buy something worth 480 grand. So this is what SIPPs can do. So they bought this building, this commercial building in there, 480 grand, funded mostly with tax deductible pension contributions from the company plus a commercial mortgage. Okay? And this owns the building out of which this trades, and then there is further tax relief because the rental stream, the rental payments going from the company into the SIPP are tax-free in the SIPP's hands. Tax deductible in the company, tax-free in the SIPP. Now, what about compare and contrast with SSAS? the title of the video, right? So, the tax rules work exactly the same if it had been a SAS instead of a SIPP. Tax relief on the way in, tax-free yields, tax-free growth. SASs can gear up and borrow 50% of their value if you want to buy assets. But SASs cost a lot more money, generally. We're talking thousands of pounds a year to administer a SAS. Now remember, it does exactly the same thing as a SIPP from a tax point of view and these other things that we've talked about thus far, gearing to buy an asset. So why would you have a SAS? Well, here's the main reason. Let's say, fast forward 5 years. Company is not doing so well, unfortunately. They're a bit strapped for cash. They're had a downturn in business. They could really do with a cash injection. The banks aren't playing ball, but the director shareholders, the husband and wife, they think, hang on a minute. We've got this commercial building locked away in our SIPP, which we got it for just under £500,000. Now it's worth £750,000. We could really do with selling it and getting our hands on some of that cash to help us out, to bail us out in our business. What can we do? Well, SIPPs can't do anything. But with a SAS, this is what you can do. With a SAS can lend money to an associated trading company here. So in this case, had the building been in a SAS, sell the building within the SAS wrapper, no capital gains tax. All of a sudden, the SAS is flush with £750,000 of cash, and the rules say that a SAS can lend, it itself can lend back to a sponsoring company, for want of a better phrase, an associated company, half of its value. Half of 750,000, 375 grand. So the director shareholders could get a 375 grand loan from their pension fund to their company, which they couldn't do with a SIPP. But what is the likelihood of this happening in practice? It is quite a rare thing, but yes, it's comforting to know that it can happen if you need it, because a lot of people worry about putting money in pensions, locking it away for years, particularly let's say these guys are in their 30s, knowing that they can't really access anything until their late 50s. But with a SAS, goodness, heaven forbid, you are in that spot of bother and you need to access the money, that's one way to do it. And that is an advantage of a SAS over a SIPP. Now, I would suggest, like I said, in this timeline, everything's fine and dandy for 5 years. Then the company's in trouble. So what you can do, still start out with a SIPP and then transfer it, convert it into a SAS down the line when you need to get your hands on the money. Because why pay thousands and thousands of pounds a year to have a SAS from day one when you don't need it for that extra benefit of hypothetically having to tap into it if you're ever in trouble? Why would you? You'd start off with a SIPP, and then if you got in that situation, if you're in the minority of people that would actually need to get your hands on the money, then you'd convert the SIPP into a SAS, and that is a no tax leakage event. So yes, it costs fees to do it because SASs are expensive, but at that point, converting your SIPP into a SAS, there is no tax leakage. You're just exchanging one tax efficient pension wrapper for another. So the property that was in a SIPP all of a sudden is in a SAS, and then the SAS is then allowed to lend 50% back. So don't get confused with the two lots of 50% here. Remember this at the start, the SIPP or the SAS can borrow from someone else half of its value, but then on the flip side, the SAS can lend half of what is in there to this sponsoring company, unlike the SIPP. So the SAS, in this case, has lent 375 grand on a commercial loan, and there's certain hoops that you've got to jump through. It's got to be a maximum loan no more than 5 years. So you'd hope the company would hope they have to. They've got to pay this off within 5 years. You've got to put up some security, interest, various rules that you've got to jump through to get this loan effected and get the money out from the SAS into the trading company. But that's the principal reason why you would have a SAS. I would suggest don't bother paying thousands of pounds a year for a SAS from the get-go. If you're at the point of choosing which pension wrapper to have, get a SIPP, because that is cheap. You can set them up in about 20 minutes, literally, online, or see a financial advisor. They'll give you investment advice. If you haven't earmarked a commercial property and you want to put it in the stock market or whatever, then you get a financial advisor involved. You don't have to. The point of a SIPP, it actually stands for self-invested personal pension. You can totally do your own thing in this, if you're comfortable with your own investment decisions. So, I would suggest always go for a SIPP to begin with. Then, if God forbid you're ever in bother in the future and you need to get your hands on this way before the pensionable crystallization age, which is currently 57, going to be 58, then the way to do it at that point, convert SIPP into SAS, and then you can do this loan back from your SAS, which you can't from the SIPP. But I would not dive into a SAS straight away, right from the get-go, even though the tax breaks are exactly the same as the SIPP, because of the fees, because they generally cost thousands of pounds a year to have one of these SASs. So, just an overview there on the differences between SIPPs and SASs. Like I said, just generally, just to box it off, tax breaks, exactly the same, but the real flexibility of the SAS is the ability to get your hands on half of what is in that pension pot, should you need it, if for the company. So remember, it doesn't come to the individuals. Well, it could. I suppose if it comes in as a loan to the company, they could pay it out to individuals, but you've got directors' loan and various other tax consequences of moving money from there to there. But the whole point is that the SAS will lend to Associated Trading Company. So if you like this video, please do remember to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you soon.